Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the final session of Green Alliance's conference, Making It Count. And I'm delighted to welcome the Secretary of State for Business. Oh God, I always get this wrong. Anyway, it's Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, Alok Sharma, who in that role has one of the most difficult jobs in politics with all the impact of COVID and Brexit and so on, but also has one of the most exciting jobs in politics as President of COP26. And Alok Sharma is going to talk for about 10 minutes. We're then going to have a question and answer session from two climate activists, Holly Gillibrand, who's phoning in from Fort William, and Aryanna Khan, who's phoning in from New York. And then we will have after that discussion, we'll have a sort of hard finish at 4 o'clock when Alok Sharma has got to go on a conference call, and then we'll wind up the event. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the Secretary of State, Alok Sharma.
Great, Sean. Thank you very much for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, on this meeting. Look, firstly, a huge thank you to the Green Alliance for inviting me to speak today. And thank you also for everything that you have done and that you continue to do to advance climate policy and climate action. And frankly, for the moment, we've moved into this virtual world where we're doing everything virtually. Some of us remember a time when we actually did have physical meetings and physical events. And I'm really looking forward to that time again and coming in and speaking with you live, so to speak, in front of you. I just want to talk a little bit about one of the physical visits that I have done in this role. And this was within days of being appointed to the COP26 role. I went to New York to visit the United Nations, and I had an opportunity alongside the Secretary General to speak with the UN permanent representatives. And during that trip, I also had a whole range of meetings. And there was one particular meeting that struck a real chord with me. And it was one of these informal gatherings, and we had the permanent representatives from the developing countries around the table. And we went round the table, and I asked each of them, what did climate change mean for them and their country? And then we got to the representative of one of the small island developing states. And she said this: unless we tackle climate change urgently, I won't have a place to call home. And actually what made this really stark message so poignant was also the manner of the delivery. She was calm, she was collected, it was matter of fact. And that was the point at which I resolved that whatever else we may achieve on the road to COP, at COP itself, we must make this the most inclusive COP ever. And I want to ensure that the voices of vulnerable countries, of indigenous people, civil society, and of course, young people are heard loud and clear and on an equal footing with larger, richer nations. I'm going to return to some of the practical things we're doing to make sure that happens. But I just want to go back to your launch, the Green Alliance's launch in 1979. And your founding chairman, Maurice Ash, said at the time, and I quote, "We're a bunch of optimists. We're not doomsters, and we believe in the possibilities of the future." Well, look, I mean, on that basis and on that description, I very much consider myself part of the Green Alliance gang. And there are actually reasons to be optimistic when it comes to climate action, because I do believe we're at a vital inflection point where the views of governments, of businesses, and civil society are coalescing in a determination to tackle climate change. And look, quite rightly, we've all been focused this year on the climate emergency, and that's on the COVID emergency rather, and that's right and proper. But I think all of us recognize that the climate emergency hasn't gone away. The clock is still ticking, and those two hands on the dial continue to move inexorably closer to midnight. But we can, and we are, taking action. And as we look to emerge from the dark shadow of COVID, I want 2021 to mark the beginning of the future that we all want. I want 2021 to be the year the world unites behind the Paris Agreement, putting it on course for a clean, resilient age. And governments around the world, of course, are looking to build back greener. You've seen in China, Japan, South Korea, they've committed recently to going to net zero, like other countries. And crucially, what governments are also doing is putting policy heft and finance behind their intentions. Businesses are also committing to science-based net zero targets. And actually, if you take into account all the companies, all the cities, all the regions, all the other non-state actors which have signed up to the UN's Race to Zero campaign, which is launched in June, they collectively already represent 50% of the global economy and 25% of global emissions. And all of these organizations, remember, have committed on science-based targets to reach net zero emissions by 2050 or indeed earlier. And actually, business realizes that going green is not just the right thing to do, but it's also what their customers want. And increasingly, it's what drives shareholder value. The UK as a country has demonstrated that green growth is possible. Over the last 30 years, we've managed to grow our economy by 75%, and yet at the same time cut emissions by 43%. And you will have seen that last week, Prime Minister Boris Johnson launched our country's blueprint for a green industrial revolution. And this is a plan to consign to history industrial chimneys and processes, vehicle tailpipes and home heating, which spews out harmful emissions. What we want is a clean future powered by hydrogen, by wind turbines and electric vehicle batteries, revitalizing our industrial heartlands and economy and creating high value added green jobs. And of course, all the while, civil society quite rightly is holding a mirror up to the actions of governments and businesses. And you're spurring us on to change. But of course, each of us individually can play our part. Over 100,000 people have joined the Count Us In project since it was launched in October, committing to reduce their own carbon footprints. You will know that 350 young people from around 150 countries are right now holding their own virtual mock COP26. And I was very honored to take part in the opening ceremony last week. All around the world, young people, indigenous people, communities are taking action on the ground to adapt and to reduce their climate impact. Such work is absolutely critical. The crisis that we face requires us to work together across society, businesses and investors, cities and regions, universities, schools, individuals and civil society, all of us playing our part. Of course, that has to happen alongside the work of national governments. To adapt, to reduce emissions, to finance the change, our efforts support one another. And at the end of the day, government policy should be there to encourage business investment, and business innovation can provide new options for consumers. Whilst, of course, civil society can create the conditions leaders need to act and represent community interests in policy making. When we all turn our attention to the same problems, we know that we can make progress much faster. And that is why, as well as urging countries to come forward with ambitious emission reduction targets and adaptation plans, and alongside calling on donor countries to live up to their obligations on international climate finance, our COP26 presidency is focusing efforts on 5 critical issues which need an all of society response: restoring nature, adaptation resilience, clean transport, clean energy, and finally finance, which ties it all together. And I want to give you an example of the cooperation that is going on across all parts of society. And this is through the work that we're doing in the Energy Transition Council. It's a group of political and financial and technical leaders who are focused in the global power sector. And the aim of this grouping is to speed up the global transition to clean power. And we have representatives of business and civil society also involved in countries and in regional meetings. When it comes to nature, we've established the Sustainable Land Use Dialogues, and we're bringing together producers and consumer countries for discussions to tackle deforestation. And these discussions have been informed by consultations with business and civil society, which has been held in Africa, in Asia and Latin America by the Tropical Forest Alliance. And we're committed to driving this work forward over the next 12 months. Now, I spoke earlier about listening to diverse voices on the road to, and frankly, at COP26. And I want the interests of groups across society, from both the global north and the global south, to be heard loud and clear in the COP negotiations. And to achieve this, I've been very clear that they will be at the heart of both our preparations for COP, but of course, the summit itself as well. And it's why I've been so keen to set up the COP26 International Civil Society and Youth Advisory Council. This is up and running, and it's co-chaired by two young climate activists, one from the global south, the other from the global north. And as I understand it, this is the first time in any COP presidency that such a grouping has been established. We're also holding a series of events with our fellow UN climate leaders to maintain momentum around the COP26 political process and drive real world change. Next week, as an example, I'm meeting the UN observers who represent civil society at a virtual event to make progress on vital negotiating issues. Now, you will, of course, all know that next year, the UK holds the presidency of the G7. Our partners, Italy, hold the presidency of the G20, and together we share the presidency of COP26. And on the road to COP26, I want to see a golden thread of climate action as a key theme, flowing strongly like a torrent through the G7 and the G20 and every major international leader-level gathering ahead of those 2 weeks of COP26 in November 2021. And then the first stopover on that road is, of course, the Climate Ambition Summit that's taking place on the 12th of December. We're hosting this with the UN and France in partnership with Italy and Chile. And this is the point that marks the 5-year anniversary of the Paris Agreement. And we're calling on countries to use this summit to announce ambitious commitments on emissions, on adaptation, and on climate finance. And yes, the UK will be setting out its own nationally determined contribution metric ahead of the 12th of December. And there will be room at this summit for non-state actors to make commitments, and we will absolutely provide a platform for civil society, for young people, indigenous peoples, to make sure that their voices are heard. This is something that I consider to be absolutely vital in this process. Of course, in the run-up to next November, we will host more discussions to make progress on the issues and negotiations, because we all recognize that the next 12 months are absolutely critical. We must put the world in the best possible position to unleash the full potential of the Paris Agreement. And as I've said, we all have a role to play. So firstly, let me thank you, everyone who is on this call, for everything that you have already done, your organizations, you individually. Secondly, let's keep up the pressure and the ambition level. Please challenge leaders wherever you find them, in schools, in universities, in businesses, and every level of government, to do more. Thirdly, if you've not already done so, join the Race to Zero campaign and sign up to count us in. By working together, we can bring about the change that we need. And you know, at the end of COP26, I want to be able to look my friend from the small island developing state in the eye, and I want to be able to say to her, all of us working together made a positive difference. And we did it for today's and tomorrow's generations. Thank you very much for having me speak, and I'm very happy now to answer some questions.
Great, thank you so much for such a clear, powerful and optimistic speech, and the Green Alliance membership form is in the post. I'll turn to Aryaana now, if you'd like to ask a question. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for speaking. My question is, since the first UN climate change conference in Berlin in 1995, every other COP has been highly anticipated and touted as the global turning point for climate action. So what will make this Glasgow one different from the previous climate conferences? And how will COP26 deliver the impetus we need to decarbonize the economy fast enough to reach that 1.5 degrees?
Aryaana, thank you very much. It's a very direct question, straight to the point. You're absolutely right. We need to show proper progress. But the reality is that the impetus is the work that we do right now in the lead up to COP26. I've set out in my remarks some of the work that we're doing. And the reality is that the success at COP26, if indeed we have success, will belong to all of us. It'll belong to countries, it'll belong to non-state actors, it'll belong to civil society. And that's why we need to work together, but we also need to take concrete action. So just before this event, I chaired a council, we call it the COP26 Zero Emission Vehicles, a transition council, and this is made up of ministers from countries around the world. And we talked about how do we get to zero emission vehicles, how do we collectively work together, not just individually on a sort of nation state basis, but multilaterally. And that's the kind of action that I think we need to see driving forward, where we are working on individual policies, individual areas, and of course, then asking countries' overall governments to come forward with those ambitious NDCs, which we all want to see. And I want to emphasize the point that I've talked about this event that we are holding, the Climate Ambition Summit, on the 12th of December. We've been really very clear with every country. We invite leaders of countries to come forward and speak at that event. But speaking slots are only being made available where countries are coming forward with concrete new ambitions. We have to be rigorous in the way we drive this forward. And I hope if we do that and we work collectively together, we will see the change that you want, and I want, in fact, all of us on this board want.
Thank you. Holly.
So I'm just going to quickly refer back to something you mentioned in your speech about about the UK having reduced our emissions by 43%. And I'd like to point out that it's only 43% emissions reductions when you exclude aviation imports and exports. So it is clear that the UK can't stand up on the global stage if it doesn't have its own house in order. And even though our net zero target of 2050 isn't even nearly ambitious enough, we're not even on target to achieve that. So when do you expect the UK to be back on track to meet its climate targets? And what are the key policies that will help get us there?
Yeah, great. Holly, thank you very much for that question. Look, you're absolutely right. At the same time that I am asking other countries from a COP presidency perspective to come forward with ambition, of course, the UK has to show ambition ourselves. So let me tell you how we're doing that in government. At the start of the year, the Prime Minister set up two climate action committees. One is a strategy committee, which he chairs. The other is an implementation committee, which I chair. And on these committees, we have cabinet ministers who represent the sectors where we need to take action when it comes to emissions. So we are taking a holistic approach to this. And if you look at what progress we have made, you will know that we overachieved on our carbon budgets 1 and 2. You will know that we're on track to meet carbon budget 3. But of course, we need to make more progress on CB4 and CB5. And as I said, we will be setting out our NDC, and people will be able to have a look at that and judge for themselves what their view is on this. But when we talk about action, as I said, we also set out this 10-point plan last week in terms of what we are going to do to drive forward this green industrial revolution, to at the same time create jobs and prosperity, but of course also make sure that we're going to cut emissions. And as a result of the package, which frankly was what I would refer to as a down payment on the industrial revolution, it's £12 billion. We're going to make sure that 3 times as much comes in from the private sector. And ultimately, this is about supporting and creating 250,000 jobs by 2030. So you're right, we need to be doing even more, and we need to hold that mirror up to ourselves. But it is also worth noting that the UK was the first major economy in the world to legislate for net zero. That happened last year. And of course, we've been one of the fastest countries in the G20 to decarbonize as well.
Thank you. Aryaana.
Yeah, so you spoke a bit about the Global South and our need to really finance decarbonization, but the UK recently cut international aid. And in light of that, like, what steps are you guys taking, and especially you as a COP26 president, taking to ensure that vulnerable countries have the resources that they need?
Yeah, thank you for that, Aryaana. Look, I think we all recognize, because we see it in our lives, we see it in what's happening in terms of businesses, that there has been a serious impact on our economy as a result of the pandemic. Of course, we've announced that we're going to be at 0.5% of GNI, but this does mean that we are still a world leading donor when it comes to aid in the world. And so, what does this mean? It means £10 billion next year to fight poverty, to tackle climate change, and of course, improve global health as well. And just to put this into perspective, next year we will remain one of the most generous G7 donor countries when it comes to aid. And we've recommitted the fact, last year the Prime Minister announced at the UN General Assembly that we were going to double our commitment to international climate finance. That is something that absolutely remains. So we are able to support those countries who are at the front line of facing the impacts of climate change. And I just wanted to say this, we've said that we will return to the 0.7 target when our finances improve, when the fiscal situation improves as well.
Holly.
As we know, fossil fuel companies have systematically denied basic climate science and resisted global climate action since the late 1970s. And it is clear that these countries are not allies of the climate movement. Can you tell us what role, if any, fossil fuel companies will play at the Glasgow Climate Conference?
Yeah, so Holly, look, I mean, I've said in my remarks that I think what we need to do is to work together in terms of reaching our goals of net zero by 2050. And frankly, that applies to companies, it applies to governments, to cities, regions, all of us as individuals as well. But one of the things that we've been very clear about is that what we want is for companies, whichever sector they may be in, to commit to net zero by 2050 at the latest, but to do so based on recognized science-based targets. And that is, of course, absolutely vital. And of course, we have sponsors from the energy sector, companies that are sponsoring COP26. We've got National Grid, we've got Scottish Power, we've got SSE, but they have all committed on a science-based basis. And of course, they're doing their bit to decarbonize the power sector in the UK. And I think, if we look for sort of further sponsorship, we want to do that in other sectors of the economy. But I think it's also really important that the message we send is one of inclusion. Yes, we want everyone to come forward. We want everyone to make commitments. And I think that is certainly the basis on which I want to proceed in our COP presidency.
Thanks. I say to Holly and Aryaana, if you want to come back on any of this stuff, just wave at me. But otherwise, Aryaana.
Yeah. So communities impacted most by climate change are often not given a seat at the table when it comes to global climate discussions. How will the Glasgow Climate Conference make space for those communities so their voices are properly heard and they're not tokenized? Yeah.
Well, I mean, Aryaana, hopefully. What I set out in terms of the actions that we're taking in my opening remarks about ensuring that we have the unheard voices coming to the fore and actually speaking very loudly and clearly. And as I hope people have understood, that is really vitally important for me. Before I had this role, I was doing international development in the government, and I had an opportunity to visit countries around the world which were at the forefront of facing the brunt of climate change, which they hadn't been part of creating themselves. So I think it's really important that we give those groupings a voice, and of course we give civil society a voice as well. As I said, that's why we've set up this civil society and youth group. We have a dedicated team actually in the COP unit that engages with civil society and youth groups as well. We've got a Friends of COP group, I think it's on our website. And you will see the makeup of that. We also have people on there who are leaders from indigenous communities as well. And Anne-Marie Trulevian, who was the DFID Secretary of State until fairly recently, she has been appointed the COP Adaptation Resilience Champion by the Prime Minister. And so she has a background in this, and I know she's going to be doing a lot to make sure that those voices come to the fore as well.
Thank you. And Holly.
So my last point is on young people, because young people are obviously really concerned about this issue because it will impact us for the rest of our lives. And we've also been leaders in the climate movement in recent years. So what role do you see for young people in the UK and across the world in making COP26 a success?
Well, look, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, is that frankly, the decisions that we in governments take around the world today are going to impact, very much on young people, on your generation. There's no doubt about that. And I think it's absolutely right that you speak up and that you demand a change, that you demand us to listen, you demand that we take the action that I think is now starting to happen. But in sort of concrete terms, as I said, we've got our civil society and youth group. We're going to be having a lot more meetings. I've also committed, by the way, that all the visits that I do next year, I hope I will be doing some physical visits next year around the world. I absolutely have committed to the fact that I will make sure that I meet civil society groups and youth groups as well to hear their views, which I think is so absolutely vital. But in concrete terms, what we're also doing is, of course, working with Italy. They will be hosting a youth COP, which will be a pre-COP event. They're, of course, also running something called the Youth for Climate series of events, which is allowing young people to showcase what they're doing. And I talked about mock COP. I mean, we're talking about 350 young people coming across from around 150 countries, setting out their views. I took part in that, and it's really vital that we do more of that. I mean, I wish we are able to get back soon to a position where we can have these meetings physically, because I think that interaction, that human interplay is greater when we're able to do that. Like I said, I think we're absolutely going to make sure our colleagues and friends in Italy are going to make sure that happens very much with Youth COP. And I think the final thing I would say to you is that, look, I mean, I've got two daughters. I've got a 19-year-old and a 21-year-old. And what matters to you absolutely matters to them as well. You're part of the same generation. All of those issues matter. Don't tell them, but they're actually a big influence on me on issues such as climate change and climate action. But let me make this commitment to you now, is that we are going to ensure that over the next 12 months, your voices are heard loud and clear in all the discussions that we have in terms of the organisation of COP, but of course, and also at the COP itself.
Great, thanks so much for that and for taking questions, Secretary of State. There's a lot of stuff in the chat. We haven't been able to ask all the questions. There's a lot of things there about the cut to overseas aid, about the lack of women in the leadership team of the COP unit, etc., etc. We'll send you all those questions for you to reflect on, and I hope you get a chance to read them. But I'm really grateful to you for your time and your very strong message and commitment to this process and to working with the widest possible community of people in this country and around the world. So thank you very much indeed. I know you've got to go now. I'd like to thank Holly and Aryaana as well for their questions. Bringing the conference to an end now, but I'd like to thank everybody who's been involved, all the partners, all the speakers. I'd like to thank the COP unit who've been very helpful in putting it together, Charlie Ogilvie and Nikita Mistry, who spoke earlier. I don't know, Ollie Mount and Chris Venables and the Green Alliance team have put it together, have done a fantastic job. Obviously, like to thank all the participants. And the last thing to say is we'll put a link now in the chat, but we've got this fantastic kind of breakout room where you can replicate the mingling you normally get at a face-to-face conference. It's very scary. I did it earlier. I sort of bent around all the tables, wondering if I know anybody on them, but just go and sit on a table and make friends with somebody. And there we are. Chris has put the link in there. It's so intuitive that I managed to work out how to do it myself. So thanks all very much indeed, and see you in the breakout session. Have a great rest of the day and a great weekend. Thanks very much.